What do we know as to what's happening right now in the Strait?
Motor vessel Majestic X, we intend to conduct the boarding of your vessel.
6 tankers seized, 33 vessels turned around and forced back to Iranian ports, $400 million in export revenue gone every single day. And now, the most dangerous development yet. The IRGC is not getting paid. Members of Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the military force that has been firing on tankers, closing the strait, and driving every hardline decision inside the regime, are now reporting that their monthly salaries are not arriving on schedule, the payroll is failing, the checks are not clearing, and a regime that cannot pay the people it depends on to stay in power has just crossed the threshold that history says is fatal. Because this has happened before, in Iran. And the last time it happened, the regime that thought it was untouchable was gone in 45 days. America is watching, and America knows exactly what this means. To understand why the IRGC payroll crisis is so significant, you need to understand what the IRGC actually is and why its financial situation is fundamentally different from any normal military in the world. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps is not a national military. It is not funded through a conventional defense budget subject to parliamentary oversight or public accounting. The IRGC is a revolutionary institution dedicated to the Islamic Revolution itself, not to the Iranian people, not to the Iranian state in the conventional sense, but to the ideological project that created the regime in 1979. And the IRGC funds itself directly through control of Iran's oil industry. For decades, the IRGC has managed and profited from Iranian oil exports, using that revenue to fund its military operations, its proxy networks across the region, its domestic political influence, and yes, its soldier salaries. The IRGC does not wait for a government budget allocation. It takes its cut directly from the oil revenue that flows through the institutions it controls. That oil revenue is now zero. The American blockade that began on April 13th has intercepted and redirected Iran-linked vessels across international waters. 6 tankers seized by U.S. forces in the first 12 days, 33 vessels turned around and sent back to Iranian ports. The shadow network through which Iran moved sanctioned oil to Chinese buyers has been disrupted at every choke point American naval power can reach. And without oil revenue, the IRGC has no independent funding mechanism, no budget line, no alternative income stream, no savings account large enough to sustain operations, proxy financing, and soldier salaries simultaneously. The soldiers are not getting paid. And a military whose soldiers are not getting paid is not a military that will fight indefinitely for the ideology that stopped paying them. Here is where history becomes the most important lens through which to understand what is happening right now. In December of 1978, Iranian oil exports essentially stopped. Workers at oil refineries walked off their jobs. Production collapsed. Exports stopped flowing from Iranian ports. Money stopped flowing into government accounts. Salaries dried up. The security forces that the Shah depended on to maintain order stopped receiving their pay. By mid-January of 1979, the Shah had fled the country. 45 days, from the moment oil revenue stopped flowing to the moment the regime collapsed. Not 45 months, not 45 years, 45 days. The Islamic Republic that replaced the Shah knows this history better than anyone. Its founders exploited exactly this vulnerability to bring down the previous regime. They watched a government that controlled a powerful military, an extensive security apparatus, and decades of accumulated institutional power dissolve in less than 2 months because the money stopped. And now, 47 years later, the same mechanism is activating against them. Iran's oil exports have been hammered by sanctions throughout the conflict. The government has been burning through its foreign currency reserves for months. The blockade has now cut off the revenue stream that was sustaining what remained of the regime's financial stability. The IRGC, which funds itself through oil, is experiencing the exact payroll crisis that the Shah's security forces experienced in late 1978. History does not repeat exactly, but this rhymes with an accuracy that is making regime leaders genuinely afraid. The parallel becomes even more precise when you examine the sequence of events in both periods. In 1978, the economic collapse did not produce an immediate revolution. It produced a gradual erosion of institutional loyalty. Security forces did not defect overnight. They simply became less willing to use lethal force against protesters when the paychecks stopped arriving reliably. The calculation changed from ideological commitment to personal survival. A soldier who is not being paid asks a different question than a soldier who is not what does the revolution demand, but what happens to my family if I shoot someone today and the regime is gone tomorrow? That question, once it enters the minds of enough security force members, cannot be recalled by any amount of revolutionary rhetoric. The Shah learned this. The Islamic Republic's founders exploited it. And now the same question is forming inside IRGC barracks across Iran. And here is the part no one is talking about. Trump stated publicly that Iran is losing $5 to $100 million per day. The numbers from Iran's own economic data make this credible. Iran exported approximately 1.5 million barrels of oil per day before the blockade, generating roughly $45 billion in annual revenue. That revenue accounted for 70% of all Iranian export income and approximately 25% of Iran's entire gross domestic product. That revenue is now zero, not reduced, not disrupted, zero. The economic collapse is accelerating in ways that go beyond the headline revenue figures. Oil is not just how Iran generates export income. Oil is how Iran obtains hard currency, dollars, euros. The internationally accepted currencies that allow Iran to purchase food, medicine, industrial components, and the basic imports that keep a modern economy functioning. Iranian rials are not accepted in international markets. No country selling grain to Iran wants payment in a currency that loses half its value by the time the transaction clears. Iran needs hard currency to buy necessities. And the primary mechanism through which Iran obtained hard currency was selling sanctioned oil through shadow networks to Chinese buyers who paid in currencies Iran could actually use internationally. The blockade has disrupted that shadow network at every point American naval reach extends. 6 seized tankers, 33 turned back. The buyers in China are not receiving the oil. The hard currency is not flowing back. And Iran's ability to import the necessities that keep its population fed and its economy minimally functional is deteriorating with every day the blockade holds. The argument circulating in some corners that Iran can sustain this pressure because Ukraine sustained a 20% GDP loss while continuing to fight misses a critical distinction. Ukraine sustained that loss while retaining the support of its population, the financial backing of the European Union, and the military assistance of the United States and NATO. Ukraine received a $109 billion EU loan package even as this conflict continues. Iran has none of those advantages. Its population support for the regime was already eroding before the blockade began. Independent polling from the Gaman Research Institute found that 63% of Iranians say this war has nothing to do with them. 44% hold the regime directly responsible for the country's condition. 58% rate the regime's performance negatively. And Iran's allies are not writing checks. China, which purchased 90% of Iran's oil exports before the blockade, just publicly called for Hormuz to remain open. China gets 40% of its total oil from Gulf states and only 11% from Iran. Beijing is not going to sacrifice its Gulf energy relationships to fund Iran's resistance to the American blockade. Russia is performing solidarity while preparing to replace Iran in the energy markets. Iran is losing. Every barrel of Iranian oil that cannot reach China is a barrel Russia can sell at a premium. Russia benefits from every day the blockade holds. Iran is isolated in a way that no amount of revolutionary rhetoric can overcome. The money has stopped. The allies have chosen their economic interests over Iranian solidarity, and the people do not believe this war is theirs. Inside Tehran, the cracks that the economic pressure is creating are becoming impossible to hide. Trump issued a public statement noting that Iran is having a very hard time figuring out who their true leader is. The infighting between the hardliners who have been losing on the battlefield and the moderates who are gaining institutional ground has gotten out of control. The Iranian parliament speaker, who leads the faction seeking negotiation, has reportedly been placed under house arrest by the IRGC. The force that is not getting paid is now arresting the politicians who want to negotiate a deal that would presumably resume the oil revenue that would resume their pay. The institutional logic of that decision is difficult to defend, even from inside the regime. The IRGC called the foreign minister an idiot on national television when he announced Hormuz was open to commercial vessels. That public humiliation has not been acknowledged, apologized for, or explained. The regime that spent decades projecting unity to its people and its enemies cannot currently maintain the appearance of a single coherent position on its most fundamental strategic question. And the staged ship seizure footage that the IRGC released to demonstrate its continued power only deepened the humiliation. A cargo ship crew that opened its own side door and lowered a ladder to allow IRGC boarders to enter does not look like a defiant military power asserting control over the strait. It looks like a performance designed to cover the absence of real leverage. The USS George H.W. Bush carrier strike group is 3 to 5 days from the Middle East. Trump has given Iran 3 to 5 days to resolve its internal leadership crisis and come to the negotiating table. The timelines converge. When the Bush arrives, America will have 2 carrier strike groups, 10,000 troops, 12 warships, and 100 aircraft in the region simultaneously. The hardline faction inside the regime that is blocking negotiations will be making that decision with full knowledge of what is arriving. The economic signals arriving from inside Iran confirm that the pressure is reaching civilian infrastructure as well. The Iranian rial has hit its lowest recorded value in history. Inflation is running at levels that are eroding the purchasing power of every Iranian family regardless of their political views. Food prices are climbing. Import availability is declining as hard currency reserves deplete, and the shadow networks that once moved goods into Iran face the same disruption as the oil networks moving goods out. A population that was already skeptical of the regime's narrative is now experiencing the economic consequences of the war in their daily lives, in the price of bread, in the availability of medicine, in the value of the savings they worked their entire lives to accumulate. That daily economic reality is more persuasive than any American statement or any opposition argument. Here is what Iran's breaking point means for America, and it is the dimension that explains why this moment is strategically decisive. America did not need to invade Iran. America did not need to escalate beyond the blockade. America needed to hold the line long enough for the economic mechanism that destroyed the Shah to activate against the regime that replaced him. The blockade is doing exactly that. Every day it holds, the IRGC's payroll situation deteriorates. Every day it holds, Iran's hard currency reserves deplete further. Every day it holds, the 45-day clock that history set in 1978 ticks forward. What often gets overlooked is this. The people inside the Iranian regime who understand this history most clearly are the ones who are most frightened right now. The founding generation of the Islamic Republic watched the Shah's security forces stop fighting when their pay stopped. They know what happens next. They lived through the last time this happened, and they are watching it happen again. Every American taxpayer who funds the naval assets enforcing this blockade should understand what their investment is producing. Not just seized tankers, not just turned-back cargo ships. A pressure mechanism so precisely targeted at the regime's financial foundation that it is replicating the exact conditions that ended the last Iranian government in 45 days. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth said it directly. "We can do this all day." That is not a boast. That is a statement of strategic patience from a nation that understands exactly what sustained economic pressure does to a regime that pays its soldiers from oil revenue that has just gone to zero. This is what American strategic power looks like when it is applied with historical understanding and disciplined patience. 6 tankers seized, 33 vessels turned around, $400 million lost every day, IRGC soldiers not getting paid, Parliament Speaker under house arrest. A foreign minister called stupid on national television, China choosing Gulf oil over Iranian solidarity, Russia preparing to fill the market Iran is losing. In 1978, it took 45 days from the moment Iranian oil revenue stopped flowing to the moment the Shah fled. The Islamic Republic knows this. Its leaders lived through it. They built their revolution on the back of it. And now they are watching the same mechanism activate against them, enforced by American naval power that has no intention of blinking first. Did Iran just cross the threshold that history says no regime survives when its security forces stop being paid? Or does Tehran still have a move that reverses the economic collapse before the 45-day clock runs out? Drop your answer below. I read every single comment. If you want daily coverage that does not sugarcoat what is actually happening, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. I post every single day, and I am not stopping.